And the criteria for the award is posted on our website, the College of Ed, on the thesis and project information site, so feel free to check it out. And if you are here and starting your project and you are interested in standing up here like the winners tonight, to make sure you talk to your advisor that you have that as a goal, and we would love to see you up here next year. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dean Collins.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the College of Education, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the Dean's Award reception for outstanding master's projects and theses. Before I share some brief remarks, I'll take a minute to pay a tribute to the selection committee who helped choose tonight's award winners, and I'll ask you to stand in just a second. As Elizabeth just noted, the Dean's Award reception is now in its second year, and it's unique in that it brings together College of Education faculty and students to celebrate the outstanding contributions that are made to the field of education by our own graduate students. As I call your names, would you please stand and be recognized? First, Dr. Elizabeth Stoley, Dr. Jim Grant, some may not be here, just stay standing, Dr. Chris Hanks, Dr. Cynthia Mader, Dr. Pat Old, and Rita Corman. Thank you so much. I would also like to introduce and recognize Dr. Jeffrey Pottinger, if you could please stand. Pottinger, he's the Dean of Graduate Studies, and thank you very much for coming and supporting us tonight. Thank you. When I graduated with my PhD in education, one of my emphasis areas was educational research. And I was fortunate enough to complete my program at a university where we had many renowned experts in educational research, but more importantly in social science research. These experts gave me a lifelong passion for research and for its benefits. Today, however, my current position somewhat limits my ability to continue the threads that I started to establish as an assistant and associate professor. And my own particular area was I was interested in viewing K-12 classrooms as anthropological cultures, so from a cultural perspective. But I still do have a chance to serve as a mentor to students throughout their thesis and dissertation processes, and that has been a great pleasure to me and has been very transformative in my own development. Each time I engage in this research project with students, I'm reminded of the excitement and the potential impact from the creation of new knowledge. And I'm going to give you an example tonight of a project that I'm just in the final stage of completion. It is a dissertation study that I'm working on with one of my former students. And this has been a 4-year endeavor to complete this process, okay? All right, so 4 years ago I was approached to serve on this dissertation study. And the purpose of the study was to understand how African American superintendents experience the hiring process of being a superintendent, and to identify factors critical to African Americans specifically in maintaining their positions. The research utilized a critical race theory framework to explore the role of race, the role of racism and power, and the intersection in the recruitment and retention of superintendents. And the purpose was to try to uncover the system's true face. Like, was there a difference between what we're reading in the research, or is there some kind of counter story that's particularly applicable to African American superintendents? So what my student did is he interviewed 5 African American superintendents. They were across the Midwest, utilizing this critical race theory perspective. And what I could see initially as I started to read the transcripts that he gave me was that there was such an amazing level of trust, I think, created by both the perspective that was chosen and the expertise of the student in general, that it led to really rich narratives displaying information that I had really never seen in studies before this. While this study ended up confirming some mainstream findings from other studies, and you will probably find that in your own work. In other words, we do know in terms of importance for hiring that strong educational preparation is going to be a key. All right, so we know that confirm those types of research studies. We also know, for example, that mentoring systems, both formal and informal, are key to ascending into a higher position. So his study confirmed that. In terms of retention, things that we also know, the importance of a strong leadership team, the importance of being able, particularly as a superintendent, to maneuver throughout the political situation. So all of those were key, and again, they confirmed existing studies. But here were two things that he found that were new, and I'm just amazed at these findings, and I just continue as I go through my work to think about what he has discovered and how we can begin to incorporate these findings into making life better for African American superintendents in the future. First, a concept of racial pioneering that I thought was interesting. So in looking at the 5 superintendents, all the females, every single female was a racial pioneer. And what that means is that this person was the first African American hired in a particular role in that district. And in many cases, the only African American in a district playing a certain role. Okay, every female. Now, while that in itself isn't really, you know, I mean, that's kind of interesting, but that isn't really the key. The key to me is that the result of becoming a racial pioneer, the result of serving as a racial pioneer, created its own set of challenges for the person and really created its own obstacles in terms of success. So how is the African American female superintendent particularly going to be able to succeed as a pioneer, given the stress that accompanies becoming a racial pioneer, given the fact that there is a bias associated with being the first racial pioneer in the district and all of those factors. So I thought that was really interesting. In the female superintendent who had no mentors and who had the chosen as a result of having absolutely no mentor working for her interests, she chose a district that was scheduled or targeted for closure. Okay, a district where she was immediately working with attorneys to determine how they could save the district. This is kind of the situation that she found herself in. And in her transcripts, I would say not only was stress and isolation evident, but at a very young age in a professional career, a beginning of feeling that she's rather bitter about the system. You know, she's not really happy with what's going on because she's perceiving that there are injustices and there have been mistreatments in terms of how she has gotten to where she was. Another new insight specifically focused on Du Bois' concept of double consciousness. And I'll just describe that briefly. I mean, you really have to read Souls of Black Folk to get into what he fully described because it's a very powerful concept. But essentially, it reflects identity in the push and pull of interacting in both communities. You're interacting in a white community, but you're also interacting in an African American community, okay, at the same time. And that creates this kind of notion of double consciousness. Throughout the study, he found clear differences between, again, as I mentioned, the pathways of the African American female superintendent and the male superintendent. But that led him to think that there was actually a third consciousness in place. So it wasn't only the concept of, okay, I'm going to function as a superintendent, which was largely an identity that had been constructed as a male identity, okay, white male identity, African American male identity, but then there was a third level of consciousness of how do I function as an African American female superintendent in this role, and in the case that the role that I'm now pioneering. So the finding was significant as it suggested that African American superintendents were victimized by both race and gender oppression. And think about that. So in the end, as the committee looked at this work, they had agreed that these types of findings are going to be highly valuable in the future in terms of construction of mentoring systems for female African American superintendents, in terms of how hiring practices are structured in the future. And the most important thing for me, while I thought, you know, the findings were very interesting, but even as a participant, I mean, even being on the sidelines of this process, as a mentor in this process, I really found it to be transformative. And I'll just briefly share this. Being a female dean of education, I've also been rather a pioneer in attaining my own types of positions. I mean, especially, I mean, I totally applaud the generation ahead of me who had a much easier time, a much more difficult time, I'm sorry, than I did, because they were truly the pioneers in getting these positions. But there are still challenges in relation to issues of gender and issues of power in higher education today, okay? So, while, you know, sometimes I think, well, maybe I'm the only person on the planet kind of having these experiences or thinking these ideas, as I was reading through some of these narratives, it became quite evident to me that my own experiences were actually really almost identical mirrors of those experienced by the African American superintendents, particularly in specific to power and gender challenges, okay? So tonight we have another opportunity, and this time we are going to have the opportunity to learn from the 3 outstanding students that we're featuring. And the studies that you're going to hear will benefit all of us, as again, they create new knowledge. You will hear more about specific contributions as each student is introduced and the research is presented. Additionally, for the students, for those students who are winners tonight, it is my hope that the studies have served to sharpen your critical thinking, to sharpen your analytical skills, to complement and extend what you have learned in your classes, and enhance your abilities and confidence, rather, in your abilities to do research. I remember last year, one of the things that I took away, one gentleman on the panel, he said, I was in my courses and I heard all kinds of things about literacy research, but he said the really interesting part was to have my instructional strategies validated by the research that I later found and the study I engaged in, and I thought that was very powerful. Perhaps some of the greatest benefits of being engaged in research, again, is the insight that it will give you on how to learn, how new knowledge is created, and what a person can accomplish when actively engaging in a process to answer a research question. In closing, I'd like to extend sincere congratulations to all 3 students receiving awards tonight. Know that your presentations continue to model the high expectations we hold for our students in the areas of scholarship, and hopefully will be integrated into the fabric of your own lives as research has proved beneficial to my own. At this time, it's my privilege to introduce Dr. Nancy Patterson, who will introduce our first award recipient. Nancy?
There is something very magical when you start to read a very well-written chapter 1 from a student. And that magic happened when I began reading Ruth Hester's problem statement and then her first chapter. It was wonderful. It's like warm water washing over you on a sunny beach. It truly is delightful. Ruth's project examine the ways in which young children develop their literacies through oral language and drawing and storytelling. These are peculiar times in literacy instruction. We have a huge drive to teach skills, and to measure skills, and we leave the child out of that equation. So we teach reading, but we don't teach readers. And so one of the focuses of our program is to put the reader back into the equation, to teach a reader, not to teach reading. And Ruth embraced that, partly I think because she is an artist. And so she approached literacy acquisition in a different way, and from the lens of an artist. But she showed how storytelling, which is incredibly powerful, how storytelling and drawing help children form their identities as readers and writers. And then how teachers can create a supportive environment for that literacy kinds of thinking to bubble up. Because good writing is good thinking. It's not matching subject and verb and getting all of your pronouns to be aligned. It is about thinking on paper and presenting a very cogent argument, even if that argument is in the story, is the form of a story. Throughout her project, Ruth drew on Vygotsky. Now, we tend to think of Vygotsky in terms of the zone of proximal development, but Vygotsky's theories are much richer than is often portrayed in that zone of proximal development. And it really is the social nature of learning. And how do we learn? We don't learn in a vacuum. We learn as a result of the social interactions. The social interactions that cause the writer to write a piece of text, and then the meanings that we bring to the act of reading that text. That is what has to happen in order for true learning to take place. And we as teachers have to sort of get out of the way and allow that social interaction to happen, that dialogue to happen between the reader and the text. And so what Ruth did is she showed, not only through Vygotsky, but through then the very rich literature that is in literacy acquisition, on how teachers can create environments through which children will learn and through which young children will begin to acquire literacy. And so I present to you Ruth Hester. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nancy, for that wonderful introduction, although I don't think you've left me much to present. You have reduced my stress a great deal with that introduction, so thank you. Okay, there it goes. So the title of my project is Understanding the Connections Among Oral Language, Drawing, and Writing. And as Nancy stated, I drew on Vygotsky throughout my whole project, through the brainstorming, the composition, the organization. And that really started for me, my inquiry into this topic started with me in my work with the Grand Rapids Child Discovery Center. And I taught there at the start of my teaching career in kindergarten and first grade. And if those of you that don't know the Grand Rapids Child Discovery Center, it is inspired by the early childhood centers of Reggio Emilia, Italy. And there is a huge focus on using multiple languages, as they call it, to teach everything, to allow children to express their identities, form their identities, and using different provocations, if you will, to explore concepts of their worlds. And so my inquiry into this began in my time there in teaching kindergarten and first graders, when I realized that their writing progress paralleled their progress in drawing. They did drawing, I would say, 4 or 5 different times during the day, where they were asked to draw their ideas about certain concepts. The composing process in our writing workshop began with drawing and conversation. And so I began to put together some pieces of this big puzzle and thought way back when that this was something I wanted to look into further. So when I began my time at Grand Valley and in my first semester, took the research methods course, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And while I get used to standing up here and not shaking, I'm going to let you watch a short video that really illustrates the foundational theories that I drew from as I was working on this project.
biggest one. Look at he's got that. This car crashed. This car did like that. And then this car did like that. Hey, look at mine. And I would do that too. You need to jump over the shark too. The car was like, right? No, that's sharks? Yeah. You need to jump over the shark. That's a shark? Yeah. You need to jump over the rocks and the fires and the spikes and the rocks. Okay, and look at this car like, yeah. You saw that fire there and then you can stop and somebody's on back of me, already in. Somebody is already in that. At the end. It's already in. How do you get to the wheels? And there's a girl. There's a girl. Right. No, nothing. I'm not going to her. Somebody's already in. I'm right here. I'm right here. You're that. I'm the biggest one. Right here. That's right here. You crashed. It's you. That you crashed. No, that's not you. Hey, look. Hey, 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 hey. This one's a fire. Hey, Michael. Mine is the big giant car. This one goes fire. This was me. Look at they, Michael. This was me because I jumped. That car crashed. Yeah, crashed in the fire. I had jumped in the fire. I almost did it and I jumped so fast with this. Then I got boost. Look at he needs tires. The right cars are gonna jump in and then I'm stuck. Then go like and then crash together. And it's stuck right there. And then this was fire and got somebody else jumped for me. Then he got dead. And I got somebody dead. You're here? Yeah, that's me. Then that somebody jump over you. No, that's you. That's your car. Hey, look, this is different cars. You're blue team and you're blue team. Hey, look. You're blue team too. Somebody's stuck. I see that. This big car is somebody's stuck. Somebody's stuck. That car? Yes. That big giant car. He's stuck. What is that? That's mine. That's me. That's you. Oh, and just me, this, and David. Look at this, you. That's you. This is Michael. Yeah, let's go fast. I'm this one. Okay. I'm this one. Yeah, and you forgot to put windows. I'm putting windows in mine. On triangles or squares. Mine's and yours has somebody's stuck. And yours and you have windows. Look at this one's going faster. He can go faster, and then he wins. I'm just one. And then he crushing wheels. And somebody's here. Who wins? And then he goes faster. One person went into a shark, and a shark is a dog. That's a dog? No, that's a person that the shark is a dog. Oh. You're racing. You're the first one, I'm the second. Who, me? I'm driving away. And then where's me? No, first one, I'm second, and you're third, and then I got a first one, and then I got no wheels. Everybody. And then I got big.
Okay, so I think you can see the power of that composing experience between those boys and how setting up the environment in a way that would invite them to compose in the way that's most comfortable to them, and also providing sophisticated tools that invite them to compose. Kids love drawing with permanent markers. And these boys would not draw until I brought out the permanent markers. And so honoring their strengths in the modes of symbolic representation that they're most comfortable with. And you can see that they co-authored several stories right there together. So my problem statement involved several components. Instructional methods for emergent writers often focus on procedural skills devoid of meaning and context. Teachers of emergent writers are pressured to focus on literacy subskills to align with standardized tests, and authentic experiences with language and writing suffer. This type of early literacy instruction ignores the critical thinking skills that are developed through the interconnected modes of symbolic representation of oral language, drawing, and writing. So even in the more, I guess, writer-friendly curricula, I think that there is a push toward, in the literature provides evidence of this as well, and I think all of our own practice, we can see that there is a push toward just learning how to write the letters, learning how to spell the words, learning how to form a sentence and punctuation, and the meaning behind writing and symbolically representing our ideas of the world is lost. So the conceptual framework involves 4 components: emergent literacy, social constructivism, oral language development, and children's geographies. So in emergent literacy, according to Vygotsky, there are first-order symbols, and those include gesture, dramatic play, talking, and drawing. And when you move into conventional writing, that would be considered a second-order symbolization. And in between there, drawing helps to connect the two. So when you're teaching emergent writers, if you take away drawing, if you take away their symbol system that they're most comfortable with, that they're naturally developing, then their ability to communicate through conventional writing is lost. There are also sociocultural factors. As you can see in that video, those boys had ideas of their world about whether or not girls should be included in their car race and who's going to be first. So their roles within their play even, and their drawing could be considered play, are being expressed. I'm going to try to move on here. Deep literacy development occurs when the national symbolization process is nurtured. So that is one of the foundations of this, this project. I'm going to skip through this one. Oral language development was another huge component in that a lot of times children aren't allowed to actually talk before they write. The teacher says, here, you write about this, this is what's in my curriculum, and then the kids are supposed to get to work. Well, when they are, when you're talking about that natural development, it is, writing is actually thought put on paper. And in between there is oral language and drawing. So if you are not allowing the children to communicate through oral language or drawing, then the quality writing will be lost. So drawing actually is writing. As you saw in the video, the kids were composing together, orally and through drawing, and then the gestures and the sound effects, the cars racing and the exploding and the fire and carnage and all of that stuff. So that was all part of their composing process. So this just shows the, how the transition to writing works according to the theorists that I studied. Spoken language plus drawing leads to conventional writing. The other large piece of this is the environment. And when I was reviewing the literature, I came across a field of study that's relatively new, definitely brand new to me, and it was called Children's Geographies. And it involves the study of the socio-spatial marginalization of children and how schools have, and the environments within schools have marginalized kids in their learning and the development of their own identities. So the project components, basically the project itself is a professional development training for teachers and administrators. And I would be presenting on the foundational theories and current research and literature on oral language development, emergent literacy, and the use of drawing by emergent writers. And it would ask the attendees to examine their practices and the learning spaces that they are setting up for their children. And then also offering some options for instructional methods that integrate storytelling, drawing, and writing for their emergent writers. I'm going to go through here, and I talked about the tools a bit. If you give kids sophisticated tools, they will produce sophisticated things. So crayons and coloring books don't produce sophisticated things. So those were some of the ideas for instructional practices that would be shared with the attendees at the professional development training. And that is essentially my project. Thank you.
Well, I had the honor of serving as Mary Barrett's project supervisor during the winter 2011 semester. And Mary, similar to Ruth, looked at emergent literacy practices and writing of preschool students. Her project, titled Educating Teachers About the Complex Writing Processes of Preschool Students, is an all-around, well-written, well-organized project. However, 3 elements stand out to me. First, Mary's project is innovative and forward-thinking. That is, her project encourages preschool teachers to think in new and more complex ways about their students' literacy practices, specifically writing. Second, Mary's project has a solid theoretical frame, and she clearly articulated the theory, understanding how it applies to the actual practice in the classroom. Finally, Mary's literature review is thorough and explores all of the angles of the problem and weaves these angles together to create the whole picture. And part of Mary's success is her strength as a writer. And similar to Ruth, as Nancy conveyed, it was just a pleasure to read. It was such a well-written, she's such a strong and beautiful writer. So her project was truly a joy to read and to supervise and to take part in. So I'm pleased to introduce Mary Barrett as she shares her project this evening.
Okay. I'm a little new to this, so I hope it works the way that I want to. Ruth did a very excellent job. I hope you're not sick of that topic because this is going to be very similar. My name is Mary Barrett, and in this August I got my Master's of Ed in Reading, and I went for the reading teacher route. My position at the time of writing my project was as preschool teacher, and the drawings you see up here will be for your enjoyment, courtesy of my very own students. Currently, I'm an ELL teacher, and also I spend part of my time teaching English language learners and part of my time teaching first graders. And the title of my project is Educating Teachers About the Complex Writing Processes of Preschool Students. So I'm just going to take you on my journey of what it was like to write my project. My project and my problem statement really arose pretty naturally from following my passion. 1 year before starting to write my project, I was in a teaching writing course, and I discovered that that really was my passion in the field of education, teaching writing. And I became very interested in the new and interesting, exciting things that were happening in the field of teaching writing, and I was really anxious to try them out and to try out all the new strategies and methods and philosophies that I was learning. But I taught preschool at the time, and I really thought, I'm not going to be able to really do this for a while until I find another position. But then a group of people came into our class to speak with us, and they were teacher consultants with the Lake Michigan Writing Project. And they encouraged us to sign up for the Summer Institute, which they said we would have the opportunity to spend a month in the company of teachers reading and writing and learning and sharing our writing teaching practices with other teachers and learning from them. And so I applied, and to my surprise, I was accepted. But then I found that I would quickly need to decide what I considered to be my best teaching writing practice. And I would need to be prepared to showcase to all the other Summer Institute fellows my most stellar practice in the teaching of writing within a 75-minute interactive presentation. And my first thought was, again, I teach preschool. And my students aren't exactly writing conventionally yet. An occasional letter here or there, but they're not writing. And so I had no idea what I would present about. So then I dove right into the research. And in the month and a half that I had to, this was in 2010, it was before I even was thinking about my project. In the month and a half that I had to try to become stellar at some aspect of teaching writing, I looked at what felt like all the research on preschoolers and young children as writers, and after spending countless hours in coffee shops, I realized that I am a teacher of writing. And what I learned that summer was invaluable. I learned that my students are writers, and I learned to redefine my own definition of writing to include any meaning-making process. This meant that I could now include my preschool students in the definition of writers. I could call them writers, and I wanted them to see themselves as writers. I wanted to learn to truly appreciate and value every effort that my students were making to communicate with me, to share the stories that were on their hearts. And so through the research and through looking closely at my own students and the things they were doing, I learned that they do this in every way. They communicate with me and share the stories in their hearts by drawing and by talking and telling stories, and even by singing and acting and playing. So I came to see my students definitely as writers. And so I came out of the Summer Institute prepared to teach a new set of preschool students. This time I was wearing a pair of new lenses and new hats, and I was ready to try all my new things and go on this year-long journey with my students and look at them and their writing in a whole new way. And I had such a renewed passion, but then as I looked around me, I noticed that all of the other preschool students didn't seem to be wearing the same glasses that I was. And, but of course they weren't, because they didn't spend hours and hours in coffee shops looking at all the research and looking at the entire history of children's literacy development, basically, because they were not crazy like me. But this led me straight to my master's project. So I spent the first semester of the school year really looking at my students, trying out all the new things I had learned with my students, my preschool students, trying out my new glasses and my hats and all of that, and realized that everything fit very well, that it was working. And all the new things I had learned about teaching writing to young writers was working well, and I was viewing and valuing them as writers, and then in turn they were seeing themselves as writers. And I wanted to share both the research that I had done and all of my experiences with my staff. So what I decided to do was develop a presentation, a workshop really, to share with my staff that outlined the research, which supports my claim that preschoolers are writers, and shared practical strategies and methods as well for incorporating more literacy into the preschool classroom and for viewing all of our students as writers, for kind of redefining our definition of writing and supporting our students in viewing themselves that way too. My problem statement then addresses the fact that historically and overwhelmingly at my school and in many preschools, writing development has been defined as a linear continuum that young children follow as they progress from making scribbles to lines to letter strings to invented and finally conventional spellings on paper. However, I came to find that my students' stories are not constrained by this continuum. My preschool students shared stories with me through the drawings that they created, the tales that they told, the songs that they sang, and the situations that they enacted. And each day, my students wove between a number of different symbol systems or modes of expression, such as drawing, talking, and gesturing, and dramatizing, and singing, and playing, in order to express themselves and make meaning and communicate and to come to understand the world around them. Therefore, they are writers. And I found evidence of this daily in my classroom and found this claim supported by many professionals and researchers, many of which the same that I saw in Ruth's presentation, but some different ones as well. Ann Haas-Dyson, who's a very pivotal researcher in early childhood writing development. She did the majority of her research in the 80s and 90s. It was ethnographic research. And Marjorie Siegel, who was important when talking about symbol systems and different modes of expression. I looked a lot at Ken and Yetta Goodman, researchers in whole language and early literacy, and Leslie Mandel-Morrow and Susan B. Newman, who talk a lot about literacy-enriched play, and Katie Wood-Ray, who's a very current teacher and researcher in the field of early writing. And so these researchers helped me understand that no two paths to literacy look the same, and that there's no one best way to support young children on their path to writing. So what I came to understand was that specific decisions about teaching writing to preschool students should be made by individual teachers on an individual basis. So my project really aimed at arming preschool teachers with the theory and background supporting the intricate writing development of preschool students and providing suggested practical ways to increase sensitivity to their complex literate practices, which included noticing the many ways that students make meaning throughout the day and communicate, whether it be through drawing or talking or gesturing or playing, providing models of literacy, providing time for open-ended composing periods like the drawing sessions that you saw in Ruth's video, and supporting dramatic play even with literacy. So my project also held teachers accountable to develop their own adapted strategies for use in their classroom, and then to consult with me later on. My project is grounded in a few theories. One, emergent literacy. Researchers such as Morrow, Cantor, Yaden, Roscoe, Christie, and Whitmore, and others realize in emergent literacy that children are active constructors of their own literacy knowledge, and that they construct this knowledge as they engage in authentic reading and writing experiences and practices. My project is also grounded in semiotics, which takes the stance that people make meaning through the use of various sign systems. And achieving true literacy means being able to flexibly use and interpret these sign systems. My project stands in line with a process-oriented approach as well, which kind of combines emergent literacy and semiotics together, and adopts the view that children invent and construct and reconstruct their own emerging definitions of literacy and written language within social contexts and across symbol systems. And finally, my project also pulls from Vygotsky in the sense that Vygotski's cultural historical theory, which emphasizes the role of adults and peers in everyday experiences as a contribution to a child's understanding of literacy, and that this understanding of literacy can happen even before a child enters school as children imitate and in turn they're observing around them. And finally, in conclusion, my problem statement simply arose from my passion. And that passion, coupled with a need that I saw, a problem that I saw, led me to the development of my project. My project is supported by emergent literacy, semiotics, the two of which join together under the umbrella of a process-oriented approach, and Vygotsky's cultural historical theory. And in short, my project aims to inform and educate preschool teachers. The end.
My name is Nanyo Jarasba, and I'm the TESOL coordinator in the College of Education here. And I had initially wanted to come early to welcome Debbie's parents and herself, but I'm always looking for the 25th hour or 26th hour. In such a way, I happen to forget a number of things and come late. So I would like, before I formally introduce her, to we talk about diversity and multiculturalism, and as an African in this institution, I cannot talk without starting with a proverb. It is said that when you see two people and one carrying the other, it is not the one that is on top that needs to be congratulated, but it is the one that is carrying that needs to be congratulated. Because what they have done, the one who is there, certainly what that person has done is as worth as the person who is carrying her or him. So this said, we cannot also start the ceremony without congratulating Debbie's parents, because they are, let's say, the people who encourage her, and this is, if you want, some kind of culmination of their investment, to speak so. I would also like to associate to these her husband, because this is one element that we talk about in the course. If she can remember, the first day I said, well, tell your husband or significant others that this time you're going to spend significant hours working on the project. And you're going to be maybe mostly with me than with them. So, well, this has not proven to be untrue. And I would like to highlight some personal qualities, not academic qualities. Everybody knows that at this stage she has these. But when you work toward the master's degree or the PhD degree, you have some kind of emotions. Emotions run quite high. And in working with Debbie, I call her affectionately that way, and I think she doesn't mind. I am not certainly one of the easiest individuals to work with, but nowhere have I seen that she one time frowned or winked because I asked her, go and do this, propose that, and I will read it. Nowhere. Even to this day. She was all the time inquisitive. Is that right? What should I add? And all this. So these are some personal qualities that need to be highlighted. In addition to these characteristics, I would say the Dean talked about pioneering with some. And Debbie's work is one of these. While many people still wonder what does English language has to do with learning, has to do with mathematics, science, and so on, Debbie has gone beyond that stage. And to know that contrary to what people think, that mathematics is a universal language. Mathematics is not a universal language. Language comes in the way to impede learning. Culture comes in the way to impede learning. I will again talk with a kind of proverb. I'm not going to lick, if you want, what do you call it? In French we say la louche, which would be, do you call it, well, when you stir the sauce, what do you use it to stir the sauce and so? Yes, the spoon or whatever. If you want to really taste very well, to eat very well the soup or the food, you may end up eating that, it's a wooden thing. You may end up eating that when being full when the meal is still there. So I will not talk so much about her topic, but what you need to know is that she is, if you want, in the frame of people like Paulo Freire and Miles Horton, who state, we make the road by walking. And this road today, she is opening one great path to many English language learners. And I have my daughter with me, and I hope that she is opening one great path for her and for all the others. So Debbie, without any further ado, people are here. I don't think they have come to listen to me, but rather to you. So please come and present your work. Congratulations.
Thank you, too.
Thank you.
And Professor, you too should be congratulated because I couldn't do this without you. It would have been impossible. And I learned so much having him as my advisor. So if you are in the TESOL program, you're going to have a great time doing your project or thesis. It'll be hard, but it'll be good. Okay, well, I'll start this out with a little disclaimer. This picture is upside down, but this is my daughter. I just had her 12 days ago. This is little Veda, and my mind is still all over the place, so if I sound confusing or skip over some things, just bear with me. I'll try to do my best. So, let's begin. Yes, my topic is kind of interesting. When I told people I was going to write about math and English language learners, they all kind of looked at me like, well, that's kind of crazy. But no, it really goes together. It really goes together well, and I'll show you how. In fact, Ruth and Mary, some of the things that you said fit in perfectly with my thesis, which is really interesting because mathematics is a multisemiotic language. And I'd never heard that word before, semiotics, but you said it too, so that's awesome. I did not come up with this idea in a timely fashion. I had all these other ideas for a thesis, and then I'm a math coach at a high school and was talking with some of the teachers in ACT prep, and we had a lot of ELL students, and we were just talking about, you know, nobody ever pays attention to how difficult the math is for some of the students. Nobody ever talks about that part, how the language is confusing and there's all these background issues, background knowledge that they don't know or they haven't acquired. And nobody really talks about that. I said, you're right. This whole time I've gone through my whole master's classes and never thought that I could tie mathematics into my thesis. So I thanked that teacher over and over for giving me the idea. And so I get to combine my favorite things, math, language learning, and the MEEP. The MEEP's not really my favorite thing, but I'd love to get rid of it or change it or do something a little bit different. So that's how the idea came about. So we'll start with the problem. English language learners they have to learn not only a new language, but have to master the content for their grade level, dictated by state standards and benchmarks. And they have to do that in a shorter time frame, or the same or shorter time frame, more often than not, than native speakers of English. And regardless of how much educational background they may have, and all other kinds of factors. And we all know about the No Child Left Behind Act of 2001, which states all students must meet proficiency, the grade level proficiency, by 2014. And so to track that, they give all of these assessments each year to find out how many of your students in your school are proficient. And you could be labeled as failing, and you could face closure, reduction in staff, or face state takeover, which none of these are going to do better things for our students. And so that's what I'd like to change, how they use these assessments to gauge, how successful a school is and how students are doing. The research all shows that English language learners continue to be in the lowest scoring groups in standardized tests, and the gap persists. There's a lot of different factors that contribute to this, and part of it is unequal access to curriculum. In 1997, TESOL, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages, came up with their own standards and benchmarks for English language learners, but you don't have to be highly qualified and use those in your academic classes. So in math, those teachers aren't necessarily looking at the TESOL standards and benchmarks too. So there's a disconnect there with teacher preparedness and what's going on in the classroom. Many teachers aren't trained to work with ELLs, and I have a lot of teachers at the school right now asking tons of questions. What do I do with this student? What do I do with that? I've never had this in my educational background. I don't know what to do. And so that's a big hurdle to cross. And then just the language complexity on test items and the accommodations that they allow for ELLs aren't necessarily helpful. It's just that, sorry, I lost my train of thought here. The idea that math is a universal language kind of drives this part right here. That ELLs don't have to take the English language arts portion of the state test until they've been in the U.S. for 1 year, but they do have to take the math test. And that just falls right under that universal language. People think, oh, it's just numbers and symbols. All of those students should be fine with that. And part of that is true. The quadratic formula in the U.S. is the same as the quadratic formula in France and the same in Russia. But I don't think any of us here would like to go to Russia and take their standardized math tests after being there for 5 months. I'm not sure any of us would do that well. It takes an average of 5 to 7 years, according to Jim Cummins' research, to acquire academic language, or what he calls CALP, cognitive academic language proficiency. So we're asking students to do what takes 5 to 7 years, perhaps, in 1 year or less. And many of the items on those word problems in high-stakes math tests are written at a reading level above grade level. So not only are you setting up ELLs for failure with all that academic language, but then you throw in that the reading level is a little bit higher. So even our native English speakers who don't have a high reading level also suffer with these problems. And so interpreting the scores of English language learners on these math tests is problematic because it's assessing both their language proficiency and their math skills. So the score, you can't differentiate between the two things. So the test loses construct validity because it's assessing something it's not intending to measure. And that's something that all the legislators and test writers, everyone needs to take that into consideration. Just an example, this is, oops, we gotta go back one. This is a problem from an ACT test. And I think a lot of students would be able to, if they're a language learner, see average and be able to do the average of those 5 numbers, no problem. But it's this sentence that's the most important part, that Ms. Lopez throws out the lowest test score and takes the average of the remaining test scores. Throws out is kind of an idiom, which is one of the last things a language learner will acquire. And that sentence is kind of lost in there. It's easy to see how a student would miss that. And of course, the average of those 5 numbers is one of the answer choices. So you think, oh, I got it right. This is also very problematic for native English speakers too, who can read just fine. In ACT prep, you can't imagine how many kids miss that one. Gotta go back to that sentence. So this brings us to my research questions. The central one is, to what extent does language proficiency influence achievement on high-stakes mathematics tests? This one's so broad that I had to break it down into 4 sub-questions. So do English language learners perform differently on computation questions as opposed to word problems on high-stakes math tests? And how does their achievement compare to non-English language learners on these tests? I use the word, or the phrase, non-English language learners because as soon as an English language learner, or they refer to them as LEP, limited English proficient, as soon as they're proficient enough or have advanced in their language learning, they're lumped into the group with everybody else. So limited English proficient students, by definition, will always be at the very bottom, because once they get out of that part into proficiency, you have newcomers coming in, filling in those limited English proficient spots. And just by definition, they're always going to be that lower subgroup. It's just what's going to happen. So I just did non-English language learners because that counts proficient English language learners. One problem with all of the research that I looked into, they all say they look at word problems on tests, but nobody defines what a word problem is. And as you go through all of that research, they all have a different idea of what it is. So I had to define what computation problems are and word problems. So for my study, a computation problem is just one that's a question or statement presented in words and graphics that can be solved without translating the words into a symbol or an equation, such as solve for x, evaluate, determine the product of 4 and 3. And then we had to expand this definition to include questions like, which of the following is a square, and what is the coordinate of D? Because it's not really a word problem, it's not really computation, but I had to have a dichotomous variable, so it could be one thing and not the other. So I had to lump all those together. And a word problem, they do have to translate into some sort of mathematical or algebraic symbols to determine the solution. So that ACT problem is an example, and this is a word problem as well. The second question is, the difficulty of an item due to language complexity alleviated with the inclusion of a graphical, pictorial, or schematic representation. And this is where yours fits in, Ruth, I think, with the drawing and the language. And are there specific strands that English language learners will perform differently on in comparison to non-English language learners? And there's 5 from the Michigan Curriculum Framework: data and probability, algebra, number and operations, geometry, and measurement. And in the research I have found, one researcher, Martianello, thought that data and probability seemed to be more difficult. So that was part of my study as well. And lastly, what language issues do students identify as confusing or unfamiliar in high-stakes math tests? So my theoretical framework is also rooted in Vygotsky and his zone of proximal development, which he defines as the distance between the actual developmental level as determined by the independent problem solving and the level of potential development as determined through problem solving under adult guidance or in collaboration with peers. So learning is social, and give that student just a little bit more beyond where they are at, give them comprehensible input to build them up, and they'll learn. And as I mentioned before, Jim Cummins, he had the notion of BICS and CALP. BICS is basic interpersonal communication skills, and language learners will acquire those in 1 to 2 years. So it's survival English and all the social English, so that they can carry on a conversation. They sound like they know a lot of language, but then there's CALP, that academic language. Okay, so I'll try to speed this up. The literature review, I split into 3 parts, but I'll just go through this one quickly. This one, the first part's about the mathematics register, and there's so much to the math language. And one thing I'll just point out at the end is some culturally confusing items. A date in the US is month, day, year, but in Mexico it's day, month, year. In the majority of Europe and South America, they use a decimal comma for place value, so it'd be 13,8. And in the US, we use a decimal. And we also have the customary system, and everyone else uses the metric system. Someday we should get on board with that. It causes so much confusion. Some of the other research I looked at was linguistic complexity and performance. Item length is the only language feature that had a consistent negative effect on item performance. And accommodations, I looked at all kinds of accommodations. One researcher just wanted so badly for linguistic simplification to be the answer, and every time it just didn't happen in his studies. His name's Abedi, and he's done like 12 studies just on this, and it didn't happen for him. The only thing that they found to have a statistically significant effect was English dictionaries and glossaries. Okay, so I'm going to zoom over to my study so you can kind of see what I did. That's how many 7th and 8th graders that took the MEEP in 2007, 2008 in an area intermediate school district, and I got all of their data and used that. So it was from 17 out of 20 public school districts. 3 of them had to be dropped out. I had the information, but they had no English language learners at their school. 7% of them were ELLs. The state average is 3%, so this county had a lot more. What I did was go through the released MEEP items, which they stopped releasing after 2008, and code the different questions. So number 28, that is a word problem, but there's no graphic. So I had 2 other math experts go through and code all of these with me separately, and then we compared our answers. So we had to tell if it was a word problem, a computation problem, and if it had a graphic or not. And the data that I got was in this format, and it just kind of shows out of they have LEP and not LEP, how many students passed that question. And this is the interesting part. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I took all of my data and brought it to the Statistics Consulting Center, who are awesome, and they help you out a lot. And they took all of that, and we made these graphs using logistic regression and found these are odds ratios. So I'll just quickly explain this. That top one, those are problems, computation problems with a graphic. So a non-language learner would get that right about 1 3/4 times more than an English language learner. If there's no graphic present, it's almost about 2 times as much than an English language learner. If it's a word problem with no graphic, they're about 2 times as much more likely to get it right than a language learner. And then if no graphic is present and it's a word problem, they're about 2 1/4 times more likely to get it right. So from this, you can see a graphic does help alleviate some of that, some of the gap, but there is still a big gap. And then I had a second part, but I don't know how much time I've got. Okay, so that was a questionnaire that I had students go through. But you can read this online if you really want to sometime. Some of it's interesting, a little boring. But just to finish up, we did find, yes, I don't know exactly to what extent language proficiency influences the achievement, but it does have an effect on it, and I would encourage test raters in the future to really look at are they validly looking at scores, and then perhaps they could be adding graphics into all of their problems to alleviate some of that gap and make it smaller. So that's it for now. It was hard to put it all in 15 minutes.
Deborah, I'm going to have you stay up here a moment. Dr. Cherie Williams is going to present you with something from PDK. So, come on up.
Well, it's my pleasure to congratulate you first. I am here tonight to represent Phi Delta Kappa, which is a one of the world's largest, actually, educational associations. And we would like to welcome you into Phi Delta Kappa with a honorary membership to the state of Michigan's chapter. And with that, you'll get all the privileges of being a Phi Delta Kappa member. You'll get the Kappan research. I'm sure you came across the Kappan in your research. You'll be getting that directly to your home, so you'll be able to keep up with more research.
All right.
So I would like to, as a representative of the state of Michigan, present you with this honorary membership and welcome you.
All right, thank you.
We were going to close out the evening with a quick sort of demonstration of the Scholar Works where you can access the students' work and with a panel discussion. So since we're running short on time, what I'll do is I'd love for Deborah and Mary and Ruth to come on up. And we also have Lisa Domke, who was our winner from last year, to come on up. So we'll slide one more chair up on this panel. And invite Rita to come up and quickly let her pull this up, and while she's pulling it up, come on up, Lisa. If you have questions for the students, we'll just take about 5 minutes to have a few questions. So think about them for a minute while Rita pulls this up.
It is my privilege to introduce these award winners and honorees to something called Scholar Works. And they are now signing their life away to have their works available to the world. This is important because, especially those in the thesis department, their work is going to have impact factor. We keep a copy in the library, but if it's a thesis and we're thinking about doing the projects just for the award winners, they're available through Google. You ready for this? This is last year's thesis person. The others are becoming available, but right now it is just this one. We had a little technical difficulties. This is last year's thesis. And, hold on, let me get down here. If you look, if someone was looking on preserving the Eskora language, I just butchered that, I'm sorry, they can, this will come up. And Miss Mendoza's thesis, and she's now in the doctorate program, will be read by downloading it. Someone in Thailand can now read her thesis. In a couple of days, guess what? Somebody reading Lisa Domke's will be available through a Google Scholar search. You are going to have impact. You are representing Grand Valley State at its finest. You are now an honored member of the College of Education. Congratulations, all of you, for making Grand Valley, the College of Ed, shine worldwide.
Thank you, Rita. So it's exciting. So I'd like to just open it up. If you have any questions for Deborah or Ruth or Mary or Lisa, any questions for them about their work, their process, how they came up with their ideas?
Okay, I'll ask.
Okay, Rita.
What was the hardest part for you? I know about choosing the topic maybe, but in the actual process, was there a part that you were saying, I'm giving up, you're crying on your faculty's shoulder, and is it worth it? What was the hardest part? And how did you overcome it? Because these people here are probably going to face the same anxiety that you did, and you overcame it to write exemplary projects as thesis.
Who wants to go first?
You all don't have to answer it.
Or does someone want to start?
I need time to think.
Okay.
With the thesis, and I used students in my project, I didn't get to talk about that part. They're under 18 and you need the Human Research Review Committee to approve a lot of things, and that was a lot of work, took a very long time. I almost had to throw out that part because I was running out of time and only had 2 days to try and get as many students as possible to get permission slips signed, brought back to school, and then take this questionnaire for me. So if you have your idea all set ahead of time, work on that part before you even go into the thesis class if you can, because that really impedes the process of trying to get it done in one semester.
For me, my project was on a Spanish reading curriculum for an immersion program, and I wanted to know how you taught reading in Spanish. And so just the initial, where do I find somebody who's studied this and talked about it, without going to a teacher preparation school in Mexico or something. How do you find that? And I think it was kind of just that initial thesis project prep class. When the library came in and we were doing research and just started looking for things, I got on a couple journals, and then it just sort of trickled after that.
Can I just say chapter 2?
Sure, Mary, you can say chapter 2. At least you didn't say Dr. Stoling. Okay, other questions? We're suffering from lack of curiosity.
No.
Go ahead.
I'm curious, in your research, the first girl here, when you were showing how students draw, and that's writing, and that studies, things are showing that teachers need to allow more time for that kind of expression, that it's really the prep to writing. It occurred to me, if they don't get that, and there's that gap, if they didn't get that, then it might inhibit this linear process to being better at writing. Would that kind of go along with that? Because, I think Mary said something about, we've always looked at this as linear, but if we're leaving out such an important process, then it might not be so linear. I mean, we could put a gap there, like a learning gap, where,
Well,
you know what I'm trying to express?
I think I know what you're saying. It isn't linear, but I don't think it's too late to go back to those modes. I think everybody, to some extent, relies on drawing or images. We all learn through images, just like these presentations that are up here. And being able to create them, you learn through creating the images. So I don't think it's ever too late. I don't think the gaps can't be filled. I think it's just allowing the time, and from the research, that's what I found as well, that allowing for that time even when they're in 3rd grade and not necessarily in kindergarten and preschool anymore. I don't know that I saw anything specifically on that, but kind of a roundabout. that answer your question?
Yeah. I just thought that was really interesting.
Question in the back.
So did you notice that when you started, you maybe had an idea and perhaps it changed? Did that ever happen?
Yes.
How many times? That's a good enough answer.
When I took the research methods course to get an idea for my project, it was completely different. It was centered around poverty, and I had done a lot of research on that. And as I took that course a year before I started my project, and by the time it was getting around to my project time, it just didn't feel right, so I just abandoned it and chose something else.
Go ahead.
Mary, you said you chose yours based on your passion, and I feel like I maybe have an idea, but it's not something that I currently work in, and you kind of went from something to where you are currently working. So how difficult would that be if I were to choose something that's a passion of mine, but it's not necessarily involved with active students that I work with?
Talk to your advisor. No, I think you could probably find a way to incorporate that.
Do you want to say something about
When I started mine, I was unemployed. So even though I had a passion for it, I wasn't currently doing it. So I found a way to make it connect. I haven't officially presented or done the professional development training because I'm now working with 5th and 6th graders. But I don't think you necessarily have to be working in the field that you're intending to do your project with.
question over here?
Yes, more geared towards Ruth and Mary, I think. All of you, really. If you become so passionate about this topic, and I see how some of you with the professional development for preschool teachers and administrators, you're looking forward to doing that. I think that's really neat. How do you get parents on board? Parents don't have to come and listen to you talk. How do you get them behind you, backing you up? Because so much of what I do as a kindergarten teacher is collaborating with what happens at home with school, and when you don't have that together, it can be really hard to bring about change, if you will. So, I don't know, through your research and whatnot, have you found really any of the inspiration? Food. Food? Bringing food. I just know with the Reggio, especially in the elementary, it's a new word to some folks, and they're very geared toward the academics, and it's hard to increase kids and families coming when you talk about the word play, if you will.
I didn't do a lot of research on family involvement, but it sounds like I know there's a lot out there. So if that's something you're passionate about, it'd be a great thing to research.
I was going to say, you should talk to Amelia Bean, who's sitting back there, because she just finished a great project last semester on that exact topic. So, any other questions? Well, thank you so much for coming. Our winners and honorable mentions are going to be up here for a short time yet. So if you have any questions, you want to approach them, feel free. Thank you so much for coming and celebrating the students' success. Take care and have a good night.
Laura, 1:30.